The knock came on a Saturday morning in April, and when I opened the door, there was a young man standing on my porch that I had never seen before in my life, holding something small in his closed hand, and he looked at me with an expression I could not read, nervous and certain at the same time, and he said, "Are you Rebecca Hayes?" I said I was, and he said, "You saved my life. When I was 7 years old, I've been looking for you for almost my whole life." I stood in my doorway in Asheville, North Carolina, on an ordinary Saturday morning, and I looked at this stranger, this young man of 18 or 19, with his whole life ahead of him, and I did not understand what he was talking about. Not at first, not consciously. And then he opened his hand and showed me what he was holding, and I understood everything all at once, and I had to put my hand on the doorframe to stay standing. It was a small wooden bird, carved, painted blue, the size of a thumb. And I had one exactly like it. I have had one exactly like it for 12 years, sitting in a dish on my dresser not 40 feet from where I was standing. I want to tell you about that bird, and about the boy, and about the 12 years in between. But to do that, I have to take you back to the worst year of my life, which turned out, and this is the thing I have learned, the thing this whole story is about, to also be the year I did the most important thing I have ever done, without ever knowing if it worked. Welcome back to Still Standing Stories, where the women who gave something to the dark and never knew where it landed finally find out. If you have ever done a good thing into silence, helped someone, saved someone, loved someone, and never learned what became of it, this story is for you, and I need you to hear all of it. Subscribe before we go further, because what that young man told me on my porch is the answer to a question I had stopped letting myself ask 12 years ago, and I want to walk you through every year of the not knowing before I tell you what he said next. My name is Rebecca Hayes. I'm 40 years old, and I'm a pediatric oncology nurse in Asheville, North Carolina. I take care of children with cancer. That is my job, and it has been my job for 15 years, and I want you to hold that fact, pediatric oncology nurse, because it matters enormously to the end of this story, though not in the way you might think, and I did not understand the shape of my own life until a 19-year-old showed me a wooden bird. 12 years ago, I was 28, and I registered as a bone marrow donor. I want to tell you how that happened, because it was not dramatic, and I think the fact that it was not dramatic is the whole point. There was a drive at the hospital where I worked. A young nurse from another unit had a family member who needed a transplant, and they were doing a registration event, cheek swabs in the cafeteria. The kind of thing that 100 people sign up for and most of them never hear anything about again. I swabbed my cheek on my lunch break. I filled out the form. I went back to work. I did not think about it again for 8 months. Registering as a bone marrow donor is not the same as donating. Most people who register never match anyone. The matching is genetic, specific, needle in a haystack rare, and you can be on the registry your whole life and never get a call. I registered and I forgot, the way you forget things you do on your lunch break. And 8 months later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. And a woman from the National Registry told me I was a preliminary match for a pediatric patient. A child. A match for a child. She was careful with the language, she was trained to be. I understand that now, having learned how these programs work. She could not tell me who the child was. She could not tell me the age beyond pediatric. Could not tell me the location, the name, the diagnosis, anything. The rules of anonymity were strict, and they were strict for good reasons. To protect both sides, to keep the decision clean, to make sure that a donation was a gift and not a transaction, and to protect everyone if it did not work, because a lot of the time she told me gently, it does not work. She needed me to understand that I might go through the entire process and the child might not survive and I would never be told, because the anonymity ran in both directions and it ran permanently. I said yes before she finished explaining. I want to be honest that it was not a hard decision, and I have thought a lot about why. And I think it is this. I was a pediatric nurse. I had spent years by then watching children fight things no child should have to fight, and watching families wait for calls that might save their kid's life, and here I was on the other end of exactly that kind of call, holding exactly that kind of possibility in my own body. There was no version of me that said no. A child somewhere needed something that I happened to have. Of course, I said yes. Of course, I want to tell you more about the work I do, because it is not a side detail. It is the ground this whole story grew out of. And you cannot understand why I said yes so instantly on that phone call 12 years ago, unless you understand what I had already seen by then. I became a pediatric oncology nurse at 25. People ask me how I can do it, how anyone can spend their days with children who have cancer, watching them suffer, watching some of them lose, and I understand the question, but it comes from a misunderstanding of what the work actually is. The work is not mostly about death. The work is mostly about children being astonishingly, ferociously alive in circumstances that would flatten most adults. It is about a 6-year-old who has just had a spinal tap asking if she can still go to her friend's birthday party. It is about a teenager who has lost his hair to chemo drawing elaborate designs on his own bald head with washable marker, because if he has to be bald, he is going to be interesting bald. Children do not grieve their situation the way adults expect them to. They are too busy living inside it. And being near that, being near the specific unkillable aliveness of a sick child, is not depressing. It is the opposite. It recalibrates you. It teaches you what a human being is actually made of, but the work also teaches you about waiting. Oh, it teaches you about waiting, because for every child there is a family, and the families wait. They wait for scan results. They wait for counts to recover. They wait to find out if the treatment worked, if the cancer is gone, if it is coming back. And some of them, the ones whose children need what Ethan needed, they wait for a stranger. They wait for a phone call that says a match has been found, an unrelated donor somewhere in the world whose marrow might save their kid. I had stood next to those families. I had watched a mother's face when the call came that a donor had been found. I had seen what it means from the inside to have your child's life depend on the willingness of a stranger you will never meet. So when I got the call, 8 months after that cheek swab in the cafeteria, when I was suddenly the stranger, the match, the willingness that some other family was praying for, there was no decision to make. I had watched too many families wait for exactly this call. I knew what my yes meant on the other end. I knew there was a mother somewhere who was going to get the call I had watched other mothers get. The call that said, someone said yes, someone is going to try to save your child. I could not be that yes. Not after what I had seen. Not knowing what I knew, and here is something I have thought about a great deal since Ethan knocked on my door. For 15 years I have cared for children with cancer, and I have never known, could never know, whether the specific care I gave on any specific day made the specific difference. Nursing is like that. You do 1,000 small things and you never get to isolate the one that mattered. You give the medication, you catch the fever early, you sit with the frightened kid at 3 a.m., you notice the small change in the numbers that sends the doctor running, and you never really know which of those things, if any, was the thing that tipped a child toward living instead of dying. You work in the same silence I worked in with the donation. You give and give and give, and you almost never get to see the end of the story. Because the children go home, or they transfer, or they age out of pediatric care, and they disappear into their lives, and you are left never knowing what became of them. Ethan was the first time in my entire career that I got to see the whole arc. The child, the crisis, the intervention, and then, 12 years later, the outcome standing on my porch, 6 feet tall, wanting to be a doctor. I had never gotten that before. Not once. 15 years of giving into the silence of not knowing, and Ethan was the first complete story I was ever handed. And it made me understand something about all the others, all the children I cared for and never heard about again. They have stories too. They have outcomes I never got to see. Some of them are grown now, out there, living lives I helped make possible, and will never know about. Ethan was not the exception. Ethan was just the one I got to find out about. The rest are out there too, on their own windowsills, and I will never see them. And they landed anyway. Stay with me, because I need to tell you about the donation itself, and about the bird, and about the specific way I said goodbye to a child I would never meet. The matching process after that first call took a few weeks. More detailed testing, confirming the match, medical clearance on my end to make sure I was healthy enough to donate. And then a date was set. The type of donation I did was the surgical kind, bone marrow harvested from the hip, under general anesthesia, an actual procedure with an actual recovery, not the simpler kind where they filter it from your blood. I mention that only because people sometimes think donating is nothing, and it is not nothing, and I want the child to know someday. I want this child to know, and maybe he is listening, that it was not nothing and that I would do it 1,000 more times. The night before the procedure, I did something I have never told anyone about until now. I was scared, not of the surgery, of the stakes. Somewhere out there was a child, and this child was sick enough to need a stranger's marrow, which meant this child was very sick indeed. And my marrow was going to be put into this child's body as their best chance. Maybe their last chance, and I would never know if it worked. I sat in my apartment the night before, 28 years old, and I felt the enormous weight of a life I was about to touch and never see. And I did not know what to do with the feeling. So I went for a walk. And I passed a little shop that was still open, one of those craft places, and in the window there was a basket of small carved wooden birds, hand-painted, a few dollars each. And I don't fully know why I did this, except that I needed to do something with what I was feeling. I bought 2 of them. 2 identical little blue birds. One I kept. One I wanted to send to the child. I asked the registry the next morning if I could include something, anything, and they explained kindly that I couldn't. That anonymity meant no objects, no notes, nothing that could identify or connect us. I understood, so I kept both birds that morning, in my hospital bag. And here's the thing I did, the private thing. While I was waiting to be taken back for the procedure, I held both birds in my hand, and I made a wish on them. A real one, the kind you make as a child, and the wish was simple. The wish was, little bird, fly to them. Whoever you are, wherever you are, I hope you make it. I hope you get to grow up. Fly, and then I gave my marrow to a stranger, and I went home with 2 wooden birds instead of 1, and I never heard anything, ever, about whether the child lived or died. That is the part I have to make you understand before I can tell you the rest. The silence, for 12 years, silence. I kept 1 bird on my dresser, and I put the other one, the one meant for the child, in a drawer, and for 12 years I lived with the not knowing, and the not knowing has a specific texture that I want to describe because I think a lot of you are living with your own version of it. The first year was the hardest. That first year I thought about the child constantly. Every pediatric patient I cared for, I wondered, is my child like this one? Is my child in a room like this? Somewhere? Fighting? I did the math on the seasons. The transplant would have happened. Then the critical period after, the 100 days they talk about, the graft taking or not taking. I marked those days without meaning to. 100 days after my donation, I sat on my apartment floor and thought, either it worked or it didn't, and it's decided now, and I will never know which. And I lit a candle, which I'm not even a candle lighting kind of person, and I sat with the not knowing, and eventually I got up and went to bed and got up the next morning and went to work, because that is what you do. The not knowing does not go away. It just changes shape. Year 2, year 3, I thought about the child less often, but on specific days it would hit me, the anniversary of the donation, always and strangely on the first day of school every fall, when I would see the kids with their backpacks and think, my child would be starting school now, if my child lived. If always the if. I built a whole shadow life for a child I had never seen. Updated it every year, and never knew if the child it belonged to was alive to live it. I want to tell you about the specific grief of the anonymous good deed because I don't think people talk about it enough. We are told that giving is its own reward, that you should do good things without needing credit or acknowledgement. And that is true, and I believe it. But there is a cost to giving into total silence that nobody warns you about, and the cost is this. You never get to complete the story. You never get the ending. You give the most important thing you have, marrow, blood, a kidney, years of your life caring for someone, whatever it is, and then the door closes and you stand on your side of it forever, holding a question that will never be answered. Did it matter? Did it work? Did the thing I gave into the dark ever land anywhere? You are asked to be at peace with never knowing. And you try. You really try. But some nights the question gets loud, and there's nothing to answer it with, and you just have to hold it alone and wait for morning. I held that question for 12 years. And then, on a Saturday morning in April, a 19-year-old boy knocked on my door holding a wooden bird, and the door that had been closed for 12 years opened. I want to tell you about the 12 years of not knowing in more detail, because I summarized them, and the people who are living inside their own not knowing deserve the fuller version. Because the not knowing is not one feeling, it changes over years, and I want to trace how. The first year, like I said, I thought about the child constantly, and the thinking had a frantic quality, a need to know that had nowhere to go. I would be doing something ordinary, grocery shopping, driving, and the question would arrive, is the child alive right now, this exact moment? Is the child in a hospital bed or in a school or in the ground? And there was no way to answer it, and the not answering was almost physical, like a phantom limb, a reaching for information that wasn't there. I understand now, having lived it, why the registry warns donors about this. They actually have counselors, resources, for donors struggling with the anonymity. I didn't use them. I thought I should be able to handle it on my own. I mostly could, but there were nights that first year when I couldn't, when the not knowing got so loud that I would take the second bird out of the drawer, the one I'd meant for the child, and hold it, and make the wish again. Little bird fly, as if repeating it could reach across the distance. As if wishing hard enough could get me an answer. It never did. But it helped a little, to hold the bird and say the words. It was the only thing I had. By year 3, the frantic quality had faded into something quieter and more permanent. I stopped asking, is the child alive right now, and started living with a background awareness. Always there but rarely loud, that somewhere out there was a person whose life I had touched and whose fate I would never know. It became part of me, the way a scar becomes part of you, not painful anymore, just present, a mark of something that happened. I would go months without actively thinking about it, and then a trigger would come, always the anniversary of the donation, always the first day of school in the fall, and the awareness would surface, and I would think about the child and wonder, and then let it sink back down. The first day of school thing, I want to explain because it became the strangest and most tender part of the not knowing. Every fall, when the kids went back to school, I would see them, in my neighborhood, at the bus stops with their backpacks and their nervous first day faces, and I would think my child would be this age now. If my child lived, my child would be starting 3rd grade this year, 4th grade. 5th. I tracked the child's imaginary grades the way you'd track a niece or nephew you never saw. Every fall, 1 grade higher. And every fall, the same if attached to it, the same impossible to resolve uncertainty. This whole imagined life I'm tracking might belong to a child who died at 7 and never started 3rd grade at all. When Ethan told me his age 19, a college freshman, I did the math automatically, the math I'd been doing for 12 years, and it lined up exactly, of course it did. He was 7 when I donated. He was 19 now. 12 years. The shadow child I had been tracking, grade by grade, every fall, that was Ethan. He had been real the whole time. He had actually started 3rd grade, actually gotten a backpack, actually grown up, in exactly the years I had imagined it, while I stood in another state wondering if he existed. The imagined life and the real life had been running in parallel for 12 years, and they turned out to be the same life. I just couldn't see it. That is the thing about the not knowing that I most want you to understand. It is not empty. When you give something into silence and spend years wondering what became of it, you're not wondering about nothing. There is a real answer. The whole time. There is a real person, living a real life on the other side of your not knowing. You just can't see them. The silence is not the absence of an answer. It is just the absence of your access to the answer. The answer exists. It has always existed. Ethan was always 19 and growing on the other side of my wondering. I just had to wait 12 years to get to see him. Let me tell you how he found me, because it is its own story, and it matters. His name was Ethan. Ethan Cole. He was 19 years old, a college freshman, and he had been 7 when he was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia and told that his best chance was a bone marrow transplant from an unrelated donor, because no one in his family was a match. He had been in the same situation I had been on the other end of, a sick child. A genetic needle in a haystack, a stranger somewhere in a database who might be able to save him. I was the stranger, my marrow was the match. 12 years ago, my cells had gone into a 7-year-old boy named Ethan Cole in a hospital in another state, and I had never known his name, and he had never known mine. Ethan survived. That is the first thing he said to me, really. After you saved my life, he said, I want you to know it worked. I'm 19. I'm in college. I want to be a doctor. It worked. And I stood in my doorway and I found out, after 12 years, that the little bird flew, that the child lived, that the thing I gave into the dark had landed, had taken root, had grown into a 19-year-old on my porch who wanted to be a doctor. 12 years of not knowing, answered in a sentence. It worked. But how did he find me? The anonymity was supposed to be permanent, and this is the part that undid me. Ethan told me that the registry program that had matched us, a smaller regional program that fed into the national network, had shut down a few years earlier, and in the process of closing, some of its older records had been handled in a way that, through a series of events I still don't fully understand, made it possible for recipients to request donor information in certain cases with certain consents. Ethan, when he turned 18, had started trying to find me. It took him almost a year. He told me, been trying to find me his whole life, but he meant something specific by that. And when he told me what he meant, I had to sit down on my own porch steps. He said, my mom told me about you my whole life. Since I was little, she said there was a stranger who gave me part of herself so I could live, and that we didn't know who you were and probably never would. But that I should never forget that I'm alive because someone I never met decided to save me. She said you were the reason I got to grow up. So I've known about you since I was 7. I've been thinking about you for 12 years. Finding you wasn't something I started at 18. It was something I always knew I was going to do, the second it was possible. His mother told him about me his whole life. There was a mother out there, a mother I had also never met, who had spent 12 years making sure her son knew that a stranger had saved him, who had turned my anonymous donation into a kind of gospel in her household. You are alive because someone chose to save you. Never forget it. And then Ethan opened his hand and showed me the wooden bird, and told me the part of the story that I still cannot tell without stopping. He said, there's something else. This is going to sound strange. He held up the little blue bird. My mom has one of these. She's had it since I was sick. She keeps it on the windowsill in the kitchen. It's been there my whole life. I grew up looking at it, and when I was little I asked her what it was, and she told me. He said, the day of my transplant, the day they put your cells into me, my mom was terrified. She didn't know if it would work. She didn't know anything about you. She just knew that somewhere, some stranger was giving her son a chance. And she said she needed to do something with the fear, so she left the hospital for a few minutes, just to walk. And she passed a little shop, and in the window there was a basket of these carved birds. And she bought one. And she said she held it and made a wish. She said the wish was, little bird, fly. Let the stranger's gift work. Let my son live. And she kept the bird. It's been on our windowsill for 12 years. I could not speak. I want you to understand what I was hearing. On the same day, very possibly at the very same hour, a mother and I, 2 strangers who would not meet for 12 years, in 2 different places, each frightened, each holding the weight of the same child's life, had each walked into a little shop, and each bought an identical carved wooden bird, and each made the same wish on it. Little bird, fly. We had made the same wish on the same object for the same child, without ever knowing the other existed. Her from the side of the mother watching her son, me from the side of the stranger giving what I had. The same bird, the same words, the same wish. I got up off the porch steps and I said, wait here, please, don't move. And I went inside, and I went to my dresser, and I took my bird out of the dish where it had lived for 12 years, and I came back out onto the porch, and I held it up next to his. They were identical, the same little blue bird. His mother's from the windowsill, mine from the dresser, 12 years apart, 40 feet apart now, in the hands of a boy who was alive because of both of them. Ethan looked at the two birds side by side, and his face did something, and he said very quietly, "She's gonna want to meet you, my mom. Would that be okay? I need to tell you more about that first conversation on the porch, because I compressed it, and it was the most important 20 minutes of my life, and it did not go smoothly, and I think the not smoothness matters." When Ethan first said, "You saved my life when I was 7, my first reaction, I'm ashamed of this, but I want to be honest, my first reaction was a kind of disbelief that bordered on suspicion. Because you have to understand, for 12 years, this had been impossible. The anonymity was permanent. I had built my entire relationship to the donation around the fact that I would never know, could never know, that the door was closed forever. And now a young man was standing on my porch, telling me the door was open, and some part of me could not immediately accept it, because accepting it meant that the thing I had made my peace with, the never knowing, was suddenly not true, and the mind does not turn that fast. I actually said to him, I think something like, "I'm sorry, I don't understand how you could know that," in a voice that probably sounded more guarded than I meant it to. And Ethan, this 19-year-old who had spent a year working up the courage to knock on my door, did not get flustered. He had prepared for my disbelief. He reached into his backpack and he pulled out a folder. And in the folder was documentation, the letter from the registry program confirming the match 12 years ago, with dates and a case number, the paperwork from when the program closed, the records he had obtained legally with consent that connected his case number to my donation. He had brought proof. He laid it out on my porch railing and walked me through it, patiently, because he understood that I needed to believe it before I could feel it, and he was right. And as he walked me through the dates, the date of the match, the date of the transplant, I felt the disbelief crack open because the dates were mine. The date of the transplant was 3 days after my donation. I remembered because they had told me my marrow would be transported and used within a specific window. It matched. It all matched. This was real. This young man on my porch actually had my cells in his body. I had actually saved his life. It was not a mistake or a scam or a misunderstanding. It was true. And that was the moment it hit me, not when he first said it, but a few minutes later, standing over the documentation when the proof made it undeniable. The child lived. After 12 years of not knowing whether my donation worked, whether the child survived the transplant, whether any of it mattered, here was the answer, in a folder on my porch railing. It worked, the child lived, and the child was standing in front of me. My knees actually went. I had to sit down on the porch steps. Ethan sat down next to me, and he was quiet, and he let me have the moment. This kid, he just sat with me while 12 years of held breath came out of me all at once. And then, this is the part I love, after I had cried, after the enormity had passed through me, Ethan said, a little awkwardly trying to lighten it. So, this is probably a weird time to mention it, but I actually think we might have the same weird thing about cilantro. And I laughed, this startled, wet laugh, because it was such a 19-year-old thing to say, and he explained that he had read somewhere that taste preferences can be affected by marrow transplants, that recipients sometimes pick up donor traits, and he had always hated cilantro and wondered if I hated it too. And I do. I hate cilantro, and we sat on my porch steps. This boy and I, discovering that we both hate cilantro, both startled and delighted by it, and it broke the unbearable weight of the moment into something we could actually hold, which was two people who were connected in the most profound way imaginable, finding out they also just had things in common, or maybe going to like each other. That the marrow was the beginning and not the end. That is when I knew this was going to be a relationship, not just a revelation. When we laughed about cilantro on the porch steps, because you can receive a miracle and have it stay a miracle, distant and holy and untouchable. Or you can receive a miracle and find out it has a sense of humor and hates cilantro and wants to show you its college application essays. Ethan was the second kind. The miracle turned out to be a person. The best thing I ever did turned out to want to be my friend. Stay with me, because I have to tell you about meeting his mother, and about what she said, and about the thing I understood at the end that changed how I see my entire life. Her name was Diane, Ethan's mother. She drove up from South Carolina 2 weeks later. She had wanted to come immediately, Ethan said, but she'd made herself wait 2 weeks because she was afraid of overwhelming me, which tells you everything about the kind of person she was. And when she arrived and stood on my porch, this woman I had never met, who had spent 12 years teaching her son my importance without knowing my name, we did not say anything at first. We just looked at each other, two strangers bound together by a boy's life and a wooden bird and a wish we had made in the same words on the same day. And then she put her arms around me, and she held on, and she said, into my shoulder, "The thing I will carry for the rest of my life." She said, "Thank you for my son. I've been wanting to say that for 12 years, and I didn't know your name. Thank you for my son." We sat in my kitchen for 4 hours. She told me the whole story from her side, the diagnosis, the search for a donor, the day the call came that a match had been found, an anonymous stranger, and what that call had meant to a mother who had been told her son might die. She told me about the transplant, and the 100 days and the terror of the graft taking, and the slow miraculous years of Ethan growing up, growing strong, growing into a young man who wanted to be a doctor. Because, she said this, and I had to leave the room for a moment because he wanted to be to some other sick child what a stranger had been to him. And she told me about the bird. She took it out of her purse. She had brought it, the windowsill bird, 12 years old, its paint worn soft in the places her fingers had held it, and she set it on my kitchen table, and I got mine. And we put them next to each other, the two birds, and we looked at them, and Diane cried, and I cried. And neither of us tried to say anything for a while, because there was nothing to say that the two birds weren't already saying. I want to tell you more about Diane, Ethan's mother, and the 4 hours we spent in my kitchen, because she gave me something that day that I did not know I needed. And it is the other half of what this story is about. Diane was 52. She had raised Ethan mostly alone. Ethan's father had struggled with the diagnosis, she told me carefully, and had not been able to stay through the worst of it and had faded from their lives during Ethan's treatment. So it had been Diane mostly through all of it, the diagnosis at 7, the search for a donor, the transplant, the 100 days, the years of follow-up and fear and slow recovery. She had carried it alone, and she had carried, alongside all of it, a gratitude toward a stranger that had nowhere to go for 12 years. She told me that the day she got the call that a donor had been found, an anonymous match, she had gone into the hospital bathroom and sat on the floor and sobbed, because for weeks she had been living with the possibility that no match would be found, that her son would die because the needle was not in the haystack. And then the call came. There is a match. Someone said yes, and she said the relief was so total that it knocked her legs out from under her. Literally, she ended up on the bathroom floor, and in that moment she said she made a promise to a stranger she would never meet. She said, "I promised you, whoever you were, that if my son lived, I would make sure he knew about you every day of his life. That he would grow up understanding that he was alive, because a stranger chose to save him. It was the only way I had to thank you. I couldn't thank you directly, so I raised my son to carry the thank you for me." And she did. For 12 years, she told Ethan the story when he was old enough to understand that a stranger had given part of herself so that he could live. She made it, she said, a cornerstone of how she raised him. You're not just alive, you're alive because of someone's kindness, and that means you owe the world something back. It is why Ethan wants to be a doctor. She raised him on my gift, turned it into the central moral fact of his childhood, and it shaped the entire person he became. The stranger who saved him didn't just save his life. Through Diane, the stranger shaped his character, made him someone who wants to save others. I had no idea. For 12 years, I thought I had done one thing, a medical donation, cells from my hip to a stranger's bloodstream, a single act with an unknown outcome. But it was never a single act. It rippled. It became a story a mother told her son. It became the reason a boy wanted to be a doctor. It became a household's understanding of gratitude and obligation and grace. One donation, 12 years of ripples, and I never saw a single one of them until Diane sat in my kitchen and described them to me. This is the thing about giving into silence that I did not understand until that afternoon. When you give something and never see the outcome, if you imagine anything, that the outcome is singular. The kid lived or the kid didn't. Binary, done. But that is not how it works. The thing you give keeps giving, on the other side of the silence, in ways you cannot imagine and will never see. My donation didn't just maybe save a life. It became a mother's promise, a boy's character, a family's faith, a future doctor's calling. It kept unfolding for 12 years while I stood on my side of the silence, thinking it was one closed act. The ripples were enormous. I just couldn't see the water. Diane said something else. Near the end of the 4 hours that I have thought about every day since. I had said something. I don't remember exactly. Something self-deprecating about how I hadn't really done that much. It was just a donation. Lots of people donate. And Diane got very serious, and she took my hand across the kitchen table, and she said, "Don't do that. Don't make it small. I need you to understand something, because you clearly don't. To you, it was one day of your life and a sore hip for a couple weeks. To me, it was the difference between having a son and not having a son. Those are not the same size. What was small to you was the entire world to me. That is what giving is. It costs the giver so much less than it's worth to the receiver. Please don't ever make it small. It was the biggest thing that ever happened to my family, and you did it on your lunch hour. For a stranger, for free. Let it be big. You earned it being big. What was small to you was the entire world to me. Let it be big. I think about that constantly now, because I think a lot of us who give into silence do exactly what I did. We make it small. We tell ourselves it wasn't much, that anyone would have done it, that we shouldn't make a big deal of it. And that instinct is partly good, humility is good. But Diane taught me that there is a cost to making it too small, which is that you rob yourself of the truth of what you did. What I did was not small. It was the difference between Diane having a son and not having a son. I had spent 12 years making it small in my mind, just a donation as a way of managing the not knowing, and Diane, in one sentence, gave me permission to let it be the size it actually was. Enormous. Life and death. The biggest thing that ever happened to a family I had never met. Let it be big. If you gave something into silence, and you've been making it small to live with the not knowing, let it be big. It was. Here's what I understood sitting at that table. And it is the thing I want to give you, because it is the thing this whole story was for. For 12 years, I thought I had given something into silence. I thought the story had no ending, that I would never know, that the good I did had disappeared into the dark, and I just had to make my peace with the not knowing. But I was wrong about the silence. The whole time, the entire 12 years, there had been a mother on a windowsill in South Carolina, making the same wish I made, keeping a bird like mine, teaching her son my name before she knew it. The story was never silent. I just couldn't hear the other side of it. There was a whole other half of my own most important act happening in another state, in another kitchen, and I lived 12 years thinking I had given into nothing, when in fact I had given into a family that never once stopped being grateful, that turned me into their household's guardian angel, that raised a boy on the story of my gift. The good I did was never lost. I just couldn't see where it landed. And I have come to believe that this is true for almost all of us who give something into silence. You help someone and never hear what became of it. You save someone, love someone, sacrifice for someone, and the door closes and you think it disappeared into nothing. It did not disappear into nothing. It landed somewhere. It is on a windowsill somewhere. Someone is telling their child about you, and you will never know. And it is happening anyway. The silence on your side is not silence on theirs. Ethan is in college now, studying to be a doctor. Pediatric oncology, specifically. He wants to treat children with cancer. He wants to be on the other side of the call, the way I was. And here's the thing that closes the circle so completely that I still can't quite believe it. I am a pediatric oncology nurse. I have spent 15 years caring for children with cancer, the same disease Ethan had, the same fight, the same kind of kid in the same kind of bed. I chose that work before I ever donated my marrow, before I knew Ethan existed. And Ethan, without knowing what I did for a living, chose the exact same field, because of what a stranger did for him. We were both, it turns out, running toward the same fire from opposite directions our whole lives. He just didn't know it was me holding the door, and I didn't know it was him I'd saved. He calls me now. Ethan calls me. Not out of obligation. We have become, over these months, something I don't have a perfect word for. Not mother and son. He has a mother. A wonderful one. And I would never take that. But something. The stranger who gave him part of herself, and the boy who grew up because of it, finding out that we like each other, that we have things in common, that the bond of the marrow turned out to be the beginning of an actual relationship, and not just a medical fact. He sends me pictures from college. He asked me to look over his application essays for medical school, and I did. And one of them was about me, about a bird on a windowsill and a stranger who saved his life, and I could barely read it through the tears. The two birds live together now. Diane gave me hers. She insisted, said the two of them belonged together after 12 years apart, and that she liked the thought of them being reunited. They sit in the dish on my dresser, side by side, two little blue birds that flew the same day toward the same child and finally, 12 years later, landed in the same place. I want to tell you about the months, since minus the months after Diane's visit, because the story did not end at my kitchen table, and what has grown since is the part I hold most carefully. Ethan and I talk almost every week now. It started tentatively, a text after Diane's visit, then a call, then a rhythm. And I want to be careful about how I describe what we are to each other because it is genuinely new and I don't have a template for it. He is not my son. I have said this, and I mean it. Diane is his mother. She carried him through hell. She earned that title 1,000 times over, and I would never reach for it. But Ethan is not nothing to me either, and I'm not nothing to him. There is a word we need that doesn't exist. The person whose body carries part of you, and the person whose part you carry. The bond is physical, his blood is made in marrow that was mine, and it turned out to also be personal, once we met, because we genuinely enjoy each other. He is funny and earnest, and a little bit nerdy and deeply kind, and I find myself proud of him in a way I have not fully examined, proud of a young man I met 4 months ago who happens to be alive because of me. He sends me pictures from college. He sent me a picture of his dorm room, which was a disaster, and I sent back a picture of my hip x-ray from the donation 12 years ago, which I had kept, with a caption that said, "You're welcome, clean your room." He thought that was the funniest thing anyone had ever done. He shows me his life. He asked my advice about a girl. He asked my advice about a hard class. He asked me, and this one I had to sit down for, he asked me to come to his college graduation in 3 years when it happens, because he wants me in the audience. Diane will be there front and center, where she belongs. But Ethan wants me there too, the stranger who saved him in the audience, watching him graduate. I'm going to go, obviously I'm going to go, and then there was the essay. Ethan is pre-med, and he was working on applications for a summer research program, and he asked if I would read his personal essay, and I said of course, and he emailed it to me, and I opened it at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee like it was any ordinary favor. It was not an ordinary favor. The essay was about me. It was about a bird on a windowsill, and a stranger who gave part of herself to save a boy she'd never met, and a mother who taught her son to carry a thank you for 12 years, and a young man who decided to become a doctor, because someone he never knew decided he was worth saving. It was about finding me. It was about the two birds, side by side, and the last line, I have it memorized, the last line was, "I want to become the kind of doctor who is, to some other child, what a stranger was to me, the reason they get to grow up. I know now that you can save a life you never see the end of. I'm the end of a life someone saved. I want to give someone else that ending." I could not read it for the tears. I read it 4 times over the following week and I cried every time. My donation, 12 years ago, on my lunch hour, into total silence had become this. A young man's understanding of his own purpose, the reason he wants to spend his life saving children. I gave marrow into the dark and it came back. 12 years later, as a boy's calling to save others, that is not a ripple, that is an ocean. And I would have gone my whole life never knowing. if a program hadn't closed and a folder hadn't been assembled and a 19-year-old hadn't spent a year working up the courage to knock on my door. The two birds sit on my dresser now, side by side. I look at them every morning. Diane's worn soft from 12 years on a windowsill in South Carolina, held by a frightened mother's fingers through all the worst days. Mine, from 12 years on my dresser, held by my fingers through all the nights the not knowing got loud. Two identical little blue birds, bought in two different shops in two different states on the same day, wished on with the same words for the same child, finally reunited on a dresser in Asheville. They flew toward Ethan from opposite directions. A mother's love and a stranger's gift. And it took them 12 years. But they landed in the same place at last. Sometimes I pick them up, both of them, one in each hand, the way I held the two birds the morning of the donation 12 years ago. And I think about the wish I made then. Little bird, fly, whoever you are, wherever you are, I hope you make it. I hope you get to grow up. And I think he made it. He grew up. He's going to be a doctor. The wish came true. It took 12 years, and I didn't get to know for any of them, but the wish came true. The little bird flew. I want to tell you about something that happened at work a few weeks after Diane's visit, because it changed how I do the job I have done for 15 years, and it is the last piece of what I learned. There is a mother on my unit, I will keep her private, but I can tell you the shape of it, whose child is waiting for a donor. Same situation Ethan was in 12 years ago, same situation, from the other side, that I answered 12 years ago. Her child needs an unrelated match, and they are waiting, and she has that specific look I have seen on so many mothers over 15 years. The look of someone whose child's life depends on the willingness of a stranger they will never meet. And a few weeks after Diane sat in my kitchen, I was caring for this mother's child, and the mother said to me, quietly, the way they say these things at 3 a.m. when the defenses are down, she said, "Do you think they'll find a match? Do you think there's someone out there who would even do that? Give part of themselves to a stranger's kid?" And she was not really asking me a medical question. She was asking whether the world contains that kind of person, whether strangers actually say yes, whether the thing she was hoping for was the kind of thing that happens. And for 15 years, before Ethan, I would have given her a professional answer, something reassuring but careful, something about the registry and the odds and how matches are found more often than you'd think. But that night, I could give her something else. I did not tell her my whole story. It was not the moment and it was not about me, but I looked at her and I said, with a certainty I had never had before, yes. There are people out there who would do that. I know there are. Strangers say yes to this more than you could ever imagine. Someone out there right now is on a registry, and they don't know your child exists, and if they're a match they will say yes, because people do. I have seen it. I promise you, I have seen it. Hold on. I have seen it. I could say that now and mean it all the way down because I was it. I was the stranger who said yes. And now, 12 years later, I got to stand in front of another frightened mother and promise her, from direct knowledge, that the kindness she was hoping for is real, that it exists, that strangers really do give part of themselves to save children they will never meet. I could be, for that mother, the evidence that the thing she needed to believe in was true. That is what Ethan gave me in the end. Not just the answer to my 12-year question. He gave me the ability to promise other people that giving into silence is worth it, because I am living proof, on both sides, that it lands. I gave into silence for 12 years and it landed, and now I can turn to the next frightened mother and the next, and tell them, hold on. The strangers are real, the kindness is real. I have been on both ends of it, and I promise you it lands. Ethan didn't just complete my story. He turned me into someone who can give other people hope from certain knowledge that their own stories will complete too. The good you give into silence lands. I know because mine did, and now I get to spend the rest of my career telling frightened parents, with total certainty, that the stranger they're hoping for exists because I was her. And I found out, 12 years later, that saying yes to the silence was the most important thing I ever did. If you have ever given something into silence, hear this, helped someone and never knew what became of it, saved someone, loved someone, gave the most important thing you had into a darkness that never gave you an answer back. Listen to me. It landed. I cannot promise you a knock on your door. Most of us never get the knock, and I know how lucky I am to have gotten mine. But I can promise you that the silence on your side was never silence on theirs. Somewhere the thing you gave took root. Somewhere someone is alive, or is okay, or made it through, because of a thing you did and never got to see the end of. Somewhere there is a windowsill with a bird on it. Somewhere a mother is telling her child your story without knowing your name. The good you did into the dark is not gone. You just can't see where it landed. Trust that it landed. It almost always does. 12 years I waited without knowing I was waiting, and the little bird flew the whole time. It just took 12 years to fly home. There is one more thing I want to tell you, because it happened last month, and it is the moment I finally understood the full shape of what these 12 years were. Ethan came to visit again, just him, this time, driving up from college for a weekend, and I took him to the hospital where I work, not as a patient, as a visitor. He had asked to see it, the pediatric oncology unit, the kind of place he had spent so much of his own childhood, the kind of place he wanted to work in someday. And I got permission, and I walked him through, and I introduced him to some of my colleagues, and he was quiet and respectful and absorbed everything. And at one point we were standing in the hallway outside the rooms, and through a doorway you could see a child, a little boy, maybe 7 or 8, bald from chemo, sitting up in bed doing something on a tablet, and his mother in the chair beside him, that specific exhausted vigilant posture I have seen 10,000 times. And Ethan went very still, looking at that boy, and I knew what he was seeing because I was seeing it too. He was seeing himself 12 years ago. That was him, bald, 7 in the bed with his mother in the chair. And I was seeing the other side of it. I was seeing the child I might have been caring for 12 years ago. The child whose mother was praying for a stranger to say yes. And Ethan said, very quietly, not taking his eyes off the boy, someone's Marrow is going to save him. Maybe it already has, some stranger, somewhere, who'll never know. And I said, maybe, and Ethan said, I want to find that stranger someday. When I'm a doctor, I want to be the one who gets to tell donors what happened. I want to be the person who closes the loop for people like you, who spent 12 years not knowing. I want to be the one who gets to tell them, it worked. The kid lived, here's who they became. And he looked at me, because someone should have been able to tell you sooner. 12 years is too long to not know. If I can be a doctor who shortens that, for even one person, that's what I want to do. I stood in that hallway, in the unit where I have given 15 years of my life into the silence of never knowing what became of the children, next to a young man who is alive because of my Marrow, listening to him describe a future in which he spends his life closing the loops that people like me had to leave open. And I understood, finally, the full shape of it. My gift didn't just save Ethan. It didn't just shape his character, or give him his calling. It is going to keep going through him, into a future I will never see, into all the children he will save, all the donors he will connect to their outcomes, all the loops he will close because his own took 12 years. The Marrow I gave 12 years ago is going to be saving children long after I'm gone, through the doctor Ethan is going to become, who exists because of it. That is what giving into silence actually is. It is not one act with one outcome. It is a seed, and you never see the tree, and the tree makes more seeds, and those make more trees, and it goes on into a future that has nothing to do with you and would not exist without you. I gave Marrow on my lunch hour 12 years ago, and somewhere in the future, children who are not yet born will grow up because of a doctor named Ethan Cole, who became a doctor because a stranger saved him, and the stranger was me, and I will never meet those children, and they will never know my name, and they will be alive anyway. The silence goes forward forever, and it is full. It was always full. The little bird flew farther than I will ever be able to see. Drop one word in the comments that describes how this story made you feel. Just one word. Tell me where you're listening from. I read every comment. Share this with someone who once gave something into silence and never knew what became of it, because they need to hear that it landed. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.